Dr. Eugene is going to present to us next level care, the impact of medical cannabis on integrative care. And we're going to invite you to do as you've been doing, chat and engage. Put your questions into the Q&A section if you want him to answer. Let me tell you a little about Dr. An. I know him personally. He's on my care team at Cancer Treatment Centers of America, Southwestern, outside of Chicago. He is the medical director of clinical research and hematologist and oncologist at Cancer Research Centers of America, Chicago. In 2016, Chicago Magazine named him as one of Chicago's top cancer doctors for medical oncology. He serves on the board of the Society for Integrative Oncology and is an advocate for patient-preferred mind-body interventions to enhance immunity. Welcome, Dr. An.
Thank you, Carla. It's wonderful to see you as the host. You're doing a marvelous job.
Thank you so much. Looking good there. I will turn it over to you and come back for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you. Looking forward to those questions. So let me start sharing the screen. Give me a second. Oops, that's not what I want to do. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Still not? Okay. Hold on, let me just see how I open the screen on here.
Okie dokie.
Okay, and how do I do this?
Go up to probably the second one down.
Here we go. I think it's coming. There we go.
There's your desktop.
Okay. Sorry to introduce you to my desktop, and here we go in a few seconds. Okay. Showing up?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so thank you everyone for listening, and it's really an honor to be here. I presented at Komen before, and this is a great opportunity to really give you some information about the field of integrative oncology. My background is I'm a breast oncologist, and I work at Cancer Treatment Centers of America in Chicago, and I'm also a board member and communications committee co-chair for the Society of Integrative Oncology. So you can see that this is a real passion of mine. And I love to share this information because it's really empowering for people to know this. And unfortunately, sometimes the information doesn't get out there very easily. So potential conflicts of interest, CTCA is a for-profit hospital. And the objectives for this talk is to review the recent highlights in the integrative oncology field and how they reflect an evolving view of what comprehensive cancer care means, and particularly focus on the winds of change in 2020 and how integrative oncology as a growing field can be part of the solution of the problems we're seeing. And we'll do a Q&A at the end. Keep in mind, I won't be talking as much about cannabis as I originally planned, and I'll explain why. But if you have questions about cannabis, I'd be happy to answer them at the end of this talk. So what is integrative oncology? I always like to start with this because I have to assume that some of you might not know that. Oh, it's showing it there.
Yeah.
And here, let me switch to a different view. So what is integrative oncology? It's a patient-centered, the Society of Integrative Oncology in 2017 published a paper to provide the exact definition. It's a patient-centered, evidence-informed field of cancer care that utilizes mind and body practices, natural products, and/or lifestyle modifications from different traditions alongside conventional cancer treatments. Integrative oncology aims to optimize health, quality of life, and clinical outcomes across the cancer care continuum, and to empower people to prevent cancer and become active participants before, during, and beyond cancer treatment. And what's really important about this definition is particularly that it's a patient-centered, evidence-informed field of cancer care that includes the complementary practices, but is done alongside conventional cancer treatment. So really it's a more holistic version or vision of conventional cancer care. It's not opposing conventional care. So I wanted to highlight the broad differences between these two approaches. And keep in mind, this is a very broad stroke, so I don't mean to minimize what conventional therapy is, but there are very contrasting philosophies between these two fields, if you will. Conventional, which is also called precision medicine now, or individualized medicine, is a very paternalistic and authoritative healthcare model. And by that I mean really the doctors, the authority, The research is the be-all, end-all. The randomized controlled trial, the large-scale randomized controlled trial is your gold standard for establishing an intervention with conventional medicine. And this is rightfully so. Treatments are based on a molecular diagnosis of the cancer type, and increasingly it's based on genomics and other factors that we hadn't used 10 years ago. So it's definitely enhancing the care, but we need the high level of evidence because we're treating everyone the same. And so if you're giving a drug that, for example, is chemotherapy with high toxicity, you better have damn good evidence that that thing improves the cure rate to justify administering that to a large population. So the allopathic model, or this reductivist molecular mechanism of disease, is one way that we can definitely make a difference in cancer care and cancer outcomes, but really it's one aspect, not the only, of how we can address cancer. Integrative is a much more inclusive model. It's very patient-centered. And to me, what's most distinct about this compared to the conventional model is that the subjective experience of the patient is absolutely critical to the healing process. And even better, if the center, the place that's offering the healing, is engaging with those subjective experiences. What is the patient feeling? What is the patient thinking? What are their beliefs? What are their core values? If you engage with that, you're going to get a much better compliance with the treatment. You're going to get much less side effects, and you're going to have a patient that's much more resilient with treatment and is able to go with the punches for any bad news. But it really shuns a one-size-fits-all approach and allows for more consideration of your patient's preferences and values. For me as a practitioner, it's extremely rewarding because it's an opportunity to get to know my patient better. What makes them tick? What is it that I can do to help them that's going to be the most meaningful for them? And so in this complementary set of therapies, we can offer supplements, mind-body practices, diet, lifestyle to improve quality of life and overall outcomes. And the main distinguishing feature between conventional medicine is that we accept evidence-informed medicine. And what that means, we might not have a large-scale randomized controlled trial, but we might have a small one that involves maybe 100 patients that shows very meaningful effect sizes and excellent safety. If you have a drug or an intervention that's extremely safe with no toxicity and nothing but positive trends of outcomes for something, let's say, is fatigue due to chemotherapy from curative intent for breast cancer, then that's something that we need to talk about and explore with a patient. So the best way I heard summarized about this is, for example, if you talk to a conventional doctor, they might shun the use of supplements during curative intent chemo. But my answer to that is, where's the evidence in not doing something about this is going to be the best for the patient? And that came from Annie Appleseed from the Annie Appleseed Project, which you attended one of our SIO meetings. And I think that's a very fair statement. If you have a patient that's struggling with fatigue, neuropathy, and difficulty sleeping, how can you say, I'm not going to do anything because there's not a large randomized control study to justify treating you? You got to do something for them. And so there's just as much harm done by doing nothing and showing no compassion for the symptom, in my opinion, as doing something. You got to do something for it. One of the downsides, of course, is that it can be less likely to be covered by insurance. And unfortunately, the sum costs of some of these supplements that people are taking can be very costly, and sometimes without any evidence at all. So we need the evidence, but we still can't be so didactic that it has to be the evidence-based medicine standard for conventional therapy. And also keep in mind that while conventional medicine and those supporting it tend to think that they're on a pillar of true science, keep in mind the majority of the large randomized controlled trials that justify FDA approval for treatment of cancer is funded from the pharmaceutical company. I'm not saying this is an attack, but we know from Cochrane Reviews, which is a very excellent source for meta-analysis for prior publications, they've identified that clearly the research shows that if it's not coming, the research is not funded from a neutral source, for example, maybe the government, then the results are not going to be as reliable. They're going to be prone to bias. So we have to keep in mind that conventional medicine is not sitting on an unassailable pillar, and there's certainly issues that come up. Just look at the recent issues with a company called Surgisphere that published questionable data attacking hydroxychloroquine, and then also look at data about the Vioxx, the anti-inflammatory, and all the issues that came about how they didn't disclose the side effects of the heart attack issue with that at the beginning. And it was only discovered by accident through a slide that leaked that information. So just keep in mind, there's pros and cons for both sides. So this prompts a question. So go ahead, Carlin, you can prompt the question for the audience.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
So what percent of your cancer care do you feel was integrative using Dr. On's definition?
Since I'm not getting cancer care, I'll skip this one. All right, let's, you think that's enough time, Carla?
Yeah, let's see. Well, nah, they're polling, the results weren't that great, but I think it's done.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much what the literature is saying, is that you might be lucky, and you might, apparently 25% are reporting, I mean, 56% of the pollers polled have said that they had 25%, 1 to 25% integrative care. So that seems to be the sweet zone. And that definitely fits what I'm hearing, you know, when I get second opinions and so forth, and what the data, the research says. And so this is something that I think is going to grow. And, you know, we've seen greater acceptance of this. We see a lot of integrative modalities being offered in major cancer centers, including academic centers. But I do think this is a trend that's going to continue to evolve. I think the big question is, where are those integrative therapies going to be done? And certainly during COVID-19, there's a lot more push to having these done away from the cancer center, where there might be less exposure to COVID-19. So what I want to do next is just to summarize what integrative oncology as a scientific field has been able to achieve since its inception. One of the big events for SIO, the Society of Integrative Oncology, which I'm a member of, is that they have produced guidelines for integrative therapies during and after breast cancer treatment. These are available on the website if you're interested in checking them out. But the big moment was in 2018 when ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the largest national organization for cancer here in this country, endorsed the SIO guidelines for integrative therapies. They agreed with the methodology, agreed with the conclusions. And just as an aside, interestingly, when this guideline was first published, keep in mind at the time there was no good level of evidence that any supplement would improve the outcomes of breast cancer treatment. That's how little data we had at that time. But they did know that there's sufficient evidence to recommend yoga, acupuncture for certain types of breast cancer-related ailments. And then also you might have heard at this particular conference here at Komen that a recent study done by the SWA group, a cooperative clinical trial group, found that acupuncture is better than sham acupuncture at making meaningful improvements in anti-hormonal therapy-induced achy joints. And not only, but this was a really important trial because a lot of critics of acupuncture said it was purely a placebo effect. But in this study, they actually did sham acupuncture, which did have some meaningful improvement, but nowhere near as close as the acupuncture itself. So hopefully, we're hoping that this will lead to a future approval by Medicare for coverage of acupuncture for aromatase inhibitor or tamoxifen-related arthralgias. But interestingly, acupuncture is now covered by Medicare as of January 2020, so we're really excited about that. That's indicated for chronic back pain. And some of the more interesting things that have happened, I wanted to highlight for this group because this is a metastatic cancer conference, is that there's a lot of provocative information about the impact of your dietary choice on your microbiome. And the idea is that the microbiome, where you have billions of bacteria in your gut, are actually very critical about your ability to form an anti-cancer response. And particularly very fascinating is that if you do immunotherapy in animal models, that if you have a patient or an animal that's not responding to immunotherapy, you can get a mouse that's actually responding, transplant their stool to that mouse, and then they can get the immune response. And to me, this is, if this correlates to what we see in humans, and we don't have that data yet, then this could be really groundbreaking. Then we need to find out what's the optimal diet. What I can tell you right now, if you're interested, it seems like the anti-inflammatory diet, a Mediterranean diet with a lot of grains, legumes, and those kind of things are very good for immunotherapy, but you don't really want processed foods. So a lot of similar advice to what you're hearing. But an interesting study that was done last year as an abstract found that probiotics was not as helpful as changing your diet. And it kind of makes sense. If you are eating a bad diet, you're just going to encourage the bacteria that love that kind of diet to come back. So interesting information I wanted to share about that. So this is going to be a hot topic. It's going to expand a lot in the next 10 years. Also, I wanted to share that vitamin D3 is something that, particularly for this group, this audience, I really want you to know about. There's so much epidemiological data and cohort studies to suggest that vitamin D3 has a benefit, a multitude of benefits for women with breast cancer. One of the most powerful is that we see that based on your vitamin D level in African American women, that the higher your vitamin D level, the lesser your risk of developing triple negative breast cancer. And some of the critics of these data says, well, it's probably a marker for how much sunshine they're getting and other socioeconomic factors, which might be, but there's really a lot of compelling evidence that it's helpful. And guess what? A lot of patients who are breast cancer are on anti-hormonal therapy, and vitamin D3 is really a powerful agent for strengthening the bones, so we want them on that anyways. And if you're going to get immunotherapy for triple negative breast cancer, I have serious questions about the wisdom of doing immunotherapy if you're vitamin D deficient, because essentially your immune system's running on fumes. So it'll be interesting to see as we get more research if vitamin D predicts potential benefit from immunotherapy, but we don't have that data yet. So what's a good vitamin D level? Generally, I'm recommending 50 to 80. Some articles have attacked vitamin D supplementation, saying it can be toxic, but if you stay under 100, you're not going to get the increased risk of hypercalcemia or kidney stones. So as long as your doctor's following it, it can be done very safely. And lastly, I wanted to mention the vitamin C and fasting mimicking diet was just found this year to work synergistically alone, without chemo, against KRAS mutated cancers. So we've been using vitamin C quite often, actually at CTCA historically, because it does well for fatigue. But I think this is a fascinating mechanism where potentially patients who have a KRAS mutated cancer, this is more common in colon cancer, not breast cancer, that potentially vitamin C and fasting diet could be a good complementary treatment for treatment of this cancer. It actually was also shown in this study in animal models that combining with oxaliplatin chemotherapy works synergistically as well. And so actually sometimes for my patients, if they ask me, what can I do that might help the chemotherapy work a little better? I do talk about fasting and mimicking diets as a safe, reasonably safe way to address it. And if you have questions, we can talk about that as well. And then for the last slide for our key advances, I wanted to talk about the advent of mind-body medicine, because really this is why I got interested in the field. When I covered started doing breast oncology, really all the great mind-body research has been done in this field, mainly because women are phenomenally volunteering of their time for research. So really all of our breakthrough research has been done in breast cancer. And what we found is, starting with David Spiegel at Stanford, with supportive expressive group therapy, that this was improving the quality of life of patients with cancer. Back in the 70s and 80s, when he was doing this research, it was more of a taboo to talk about cancer. So just being in a supportive group where you could talk about your diagnosis and not censor yourself had a tremendous relief of anxiety and stress for the patients. But interestingly, as we continue to develop mind-body interventions, mindfulness is definitely hitting the scene now. John Kabat-Zinn developed it at UMass, and currently Linda Carlson, who is also in the SIO and going to be a future president next year, has developed mindfulness-based cancer recovery and proved that it was superior to these older modalities that we were using back in the 70s and 80s. So personally, I'm very excited to see, as we look at long-term outcomes, whether mindfulness might have actual impacts on overall survival. And also, we now have cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. A mind-body technique is now considered the gold standard treatment for insomnia. And how many of us are dealing with insomnia if we're going through breast cancer treatment? How many of you have heard of this as an option, right? So this is why I'm talking about it. And let's see. And then lastly, a very interesting study with long-term follow-up showed that if you give someone one dose of psilocybin, which is hallucinogenic mushrooms, in a nutshell, in conjunction with psychotherapy, that this resolves existential distress in patients with cancer with just one dose. And try doing that with one antidepressant. But these are, again, very powerful studies that are showing ways that we can really make a bigger impact on quality of life. That's okay. So this is a slide that kind of shows the challenges that we have ahead. I always like to step back and look at this slide, because a lot of times I get a question from my patients, why did I get breast cancer? And obviously we look for all those other reasons, genetic risk factors, lifestyles, but literally just being a woman in America is a risk factor for breast cancer. And you can tell from this map, you're in a country where actually the lifetime risk of breast cancer is about greater than 11%, and it's the greatest in this world. So I just want to make sure people realize these are the things that we're fighting against. Also, if you think about cancer being, let's say, a stock or a company, guess who's the largest stakeholder of cancer? So this was 2017. So when I was first asked to speak for Komen, I was planning to talk about the legalization of recreational cannabis. Here's a map of where marijuana is currently legal and how this can impact and improve the quality of life for patients with breast cancer. And I had that slide already, all those things ready to go, but then COVID happened. So, when I first, this has been a strange year for all of us, particularly us on the so-called front lines. And, at the beginning, I was very fearful. My biggest fear was, getting the disease, not knowing I had it because I was asymptomatic, and then giving it to my patients. So that's the biggest fear of an oncologist during COVID-19. So at the beginning, I thought, in March, when COVID was first starting to hit our shores, this is one of the cartoons that came out kind of celebrating scientists, doctors, and nurses. But I think as we started to go through this COVID-19 pandemic, there just became a greater appreciation, I think, from all of us, just greater compassion, knowing that we're all in this together. We don't want our grandparents dying from this, that they don't need to. And we want to protect those who have other health conditions or are getting chemotherapy or immunosuppressive therapy to let them surpass and survive this pandemic. So really, I started to have just great gratitude for just all the professions that I might not have really necessarily appreciated before, including teachers, janitors, those who sanitize our hospitals. And so it was just what I saw was a tremendous opportunity for unity and change. But unfortunately, reality took a different turn here in this country. This is a map of where we are currently with fatalities from COVID-19. And as you can see, we went through our first wave, but it never really went away. We reopened probably too early, and we're one of the worst 15 countries in the world in terms of total deaths. In fact, some of the numbers quoted is that US has 4% of the world population, but 25% of the COVID-19 deaths. And this is absolutely embarrassing. There's no way you can spin this any other way around. I have colleagues who are doctors, healthier than me, play soccer, and do more things than I do physically, who had to go on oxygen, almost got intubated with COVID-19. This is a real illness. And unfortunately, we're a very fractured country as a result of this. But one of the good things that's happened from COVID-19 is it's brought about, I think because we're all in this together, we're all making the sacrifices, we all feel this greater compassion for what our family of humanity is going through. And there's been increased attention on systemic biases and just wanting a greater sensitivity to these biases. Some of the critics of the attention to, for example, to the Black Lives Matter movement is that they're using these isolated incidents to inflame the population and create chaos, but I disagree with that. For example, some people cite that George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery's criminal history justified their outcome. But I think what we need to do is we need to, as a country, step back from judgment of our fellow brothers and sisters and understand that we're all doing the best we can with what we're given. And sometimes that means criminal behavior might be part of that best you can do. And we know this is true. This is the Adverse Childhood Event Study. And there's a great summary of this actually on the CDC Gov website, which I linked down there below. And we know that if you have adverse childhood events, whether they be a divorce, physical trauma, or emotional, sexual trauma, or physical displacement from a disaster, a hurricane or war, or even just parents that have a very dysfunctional way of resolving arguments, or even just neglect, that they actually can do, there's an ACE score that you can fill out to summarize how much traumatic events you had in your childhood, and the degree of your score, how high it is, predicts your likelihood of developing these different complications: traumatic brain injury, depression, anxiety, unintended pregnancies, early sexual promiscuity, HIV, STDs, cancer, alcohol and drug abuse, and less education and less income. So to say that someone growing up in a socioeconomically less privileged area can somehow just have free mobility and has freedom to do whatever anyone else can do in any other neighborhood is an absolute falsehood, because some can overcome it, but most cannot, because they're burdened with these traumas that are buried very deep in their psyche. And sometimes the best way they can manage it is to turn to drugs, turn to alcohol, turn to marijuana, turn to other things, or turn to abusing other people to get through their pain. So we have to understand that behavior, everyone's doing the best they can with the tools that they have and have learned at that moment. And then also we know that this disparity between blacks and whites exists not only in COVID-19, but also in breast cancer. And this is a recent paper in 2019 reviewing the statistics of breast cancer. And although the disparity between black and whites for breast cancer mortality has stabilized somewhat since 2011, it was widening continuously for 3 decades. But the death rate still remains 40% higher in blacks. And it's magnified even further when you look at young women who have double the death rate. And how long are we going to allow this to continue? This data has been around for decades. But here we have COVID-19, and here you see on this slide where the green line represents blacks, African Americans, and the yellow line represents indigenous Americans here, Native American Indians. And you can see that both those groups are seriously at a much greater disadvantage for mortality with COVID-19. I wanted to mention as an editorial that some of this is socioeconomic, some of this is population density. If you have a lot of family living in a small residence, that it definitely increases the risk. Health factors like obesity and smoking also modulate the risk. But interestingly, in an analysis done in the UK, they found that there seems to be other risk factors, meaning there might be biological risk factors that we haven't appreciated yet. So we got to keep that in mind too. And one of the things that I'm suspecting or hypothesizing is possible that the higher incidence of sickle cell and G6PD in African Americans might increase the hemolysis and thrombosis risk with COVID-19, which we know is one of the issues with COVID-19. And another issue is we know African American women and men tend to be lower in vitamin D. Because of the darker pigmentation, you need more time in the sun to get the vitamin D benefit. So that also might be tied into some of these factors here as well. But the point is that we're finally having a groundswell of support saying that we're sick and tired of seeing our brothers and sisters suffering. We want more equality. We want people to get a fair share or fair shake. So with that in mind, I really wanted to kind of spend time in this talk to talk about the worst mistakes I've seen here during COVID-19. And believe it or not, it's not from the politicians. For me, it's really from an integrative oncologist standpoint who understands the value of mind-body medicine. The mass media has to go through a major period of scrutiny. I absolutely believe that once we look at all the data, we're going to find that the mass media spin of promoting fear and sense of human vulnerability to the COVID-19 virus will have caused more death possibly than the COVID-19 virus itself. And that's just my prediction. I have patients who are so scared because of the news, they're afraid of even going into the emergency room with chest pain or neutropenic fever because they're afraid they're going to die of COVID-19. And yes, it's a risk, but to be honest, most of my patients have not succumbed to COVID-19. I can think of one patient that did, and unfortunately he was 81 years old, but by and large, even patients getting chemotherapy are able to get through the COVID-19. I have 2 patients who did get COVID-19 through their curative intent chemo, and they had very self-limited illness, but keep in mind, we did replace their vitamin D. I don't know if that was a factor. But so you have this great promotion of fear and human vulnerability, which is what we call a nocebo effect. If I came to you and you had a diagnosis of metastatic cancer and I said, if you don't do this treatment, you're going to die in 3 months, and you decide not to do it, this is called the nocebo effect because you're expecting to die in 3 months because supposedly the media or the doctor is the expert. So here we have the media promoting this great sense of vulnerability, so patients don't even want care for their normal medical disease. So we're seeing a lot of people dying from heart attacks and other routine health conditions that otherwise could have been saved. What's that?
Move it so we can take questions.
Oh, okay, wow. So anyways, the news was attacking vitamin C. This was an article just about someone who misadvertised their vitamin C, saying they could cure COVID. But here's the evidence for vitamin C. Last year, a randomized controlled trial, Citrus Alley, showed that you could reduce mortality by almost 50% if a patient was admitted with a viral pneumonia and intubated if you gave them high-dose vitamin C. In fact, in the first 96 hours, you had patients who were mortality of 23% if they got placebo versus 4% if they got vitamin C. Why is this not being talked about as a treatment for COVID-19? It's been actually attacked, saying that this is a useless drug, although the Chinese, if you look at their reports, they said they had high mortality with COVID-19 until they started to use vitamin C. While that's not a randomized controlled study, that's certainly more evidence to support this randomized controlled study saying we need to think about vitamin C for intervention for COVID-19. So again, there's this false promotion of a dualism as if conventional medicine is against integrative, and it's it's absolutely fake news. These are things that we need to integrate together. And again, there's good evidence to support things like vitamin D and C. It's just not a large randomized controlled study. And then lastly, I wanted to share that the key advances in integrative oncology that are mind-body, in a nutshell, this is proving the existence of spirit. I'm not going to say it proves it, but the future of integrative oncology is what I'm calling evidence-based spirituality or evidence-informed spirituality. And we're going to find out what kind of mind-body practices, what kind of prayers seem to best promote wellness and healing. These are things that can be studied, and integrative oncology is a field where we hope to do that. So next poll question. So which of the following do you feel should be reimbursed by insurance as standard of care for patients with breast cancer? One of the reasons why I wrote this out there is just to throw in a few little tidbits of integrative things that can be done if you didn't know about them. One is gel caps has good data for prevention of alopecia with taxane chemotherapy. So that's something we routinely offer here at Cancer Treatment Centers of America. We have the device here on staff. Also, yoga sessions and acupunctures, I shared before, have very good evidence for reduction of aromatase inhibitor achy joints. Mona Lisa Touch, COT laser therapy from vaginal dryness has been shown to be helpful. Unfortunately, not covered by insurance, though, usually. And mind-body interventions, which I just talked about, such as CBTI and mindfulness. So you can either say all the above, A to C, but not the mind-body interventions, or none of the above. If you think that's enough time, Carla, feel free to show the results. Oh, okay, good. So yeah, I was curious. The reason why I did this question is because some people get a little concerned about the mind-body intervention, saying, wait a minute, you're talking about evidence-based spirituality? Are you going to start spreading religion? The great thing about these interventions is there's no denominational content. Mindfulness is just about exercising your ability to observe what's going on in your head, the thoughts, what are you feeling in your body. There's no agenda of teaching any particular beliefs. So I just wanted, the reason why I share this question is just to remind the audience that there really isn't any religious context to these mind-body interventions. So with that said, I wanted to remind that one of the missions for the SIO is to empower people to prevent cancer. And so one of the things I want to conclude with is just to share some ideas. You know, I did a lot of thinking about this. I said, how do we get to the root problem in this country? How can we cure cancer in a country where we don't even value people over power and money? And I can guarantee you that no matter what medicine we come up with, we're going to still drive people into cancer if we continue to not address these issues and these biases. So one, we have to research and best practices for how do we produce good treatments that are effective quickly to prevent the long-term effects of adverse childhood events. And then two, we got to make sure we create a society where children are much less likely to have these events. Three, we got to minimalize the factionalism and polarism in politics and media. I think we all recognize this, you know, Republican versus Democrat, winner take all system that we have is absolutely the antithesis of what we need during management of COVID-19. We need cohesion, we need compromise, and a unified front. And clearly the media, the way it's structured now, is not going to help us get there. Also, I'm hoping that maybe in the future, we'll find a way to parlay our representative democracy, we can have a direct democracy. In the old days, we didn't have direct democracy because it's too expensive, too much time to get data from all of your constituents. But now with social media, that's going to be done in an instant. So what if we create an instant where our representative democracy has to be beholden to agenda items that the populations identify that they need to resolve? I think we'll have a lot more solutions than in place versus lobbyists writing our legislation to help protect companies and their interests. And lastly, check out Eric Topol. He's a very well-known scientist. Your medical and personal information is being sold for profit and you're getting not a single penny. If we fight for the rights of our personal and medical information as being fundamentally a property of ours, we're going to see a lot more prosperity because literally this is the new economy, the information economy. And it's absolutely a travesty that not a single person on this conference is getting a single penny from the millions, billions that are being made on this economy alone. So these are concrete ways that we can make changes. And if you resonate with it, please promote it and share it. And I'm open for any questions. Thank Thank you.
Dr. An, you were so amazing. You are like the rock star of the day. Questions are just pouring in. You touched on so many things. It was just like, okay, there's a question that came in. What is sham acupuncture? I know that we've studied some integrative reports and stuff, so I know they have the whole
Yes.
acupuncture that's not even on the touch points versus the actual acupuncture. So real acupuncture versus the fake acupuncture.
Yes, it's a very interesting device. So it's really well thought out. It's actually doesn't look different than the acupuncture needle, but what happens is when you push it in, it collapses into the plastic part of the sheath. So it feels like it's acupuncture, but it's really not. So
that was the study for that.
right.
Then the fasting you touched on, everybody was like, whoa. And then the vitamin D, you blew our minds with that, and the C, and it's just amazing. So they're probably going to want you to come back and do so. And then you touched on Black Lives Matter and the disparities, and you just did it all, Dr. An. You are awesome.
Well, that's why I wanted to switch from cannabis, because I just felt like there's too much socioeconomic importance to what's going on with COVID-19. And this is a great opportunity, especially with this great audience that you have for this conference, because really, even though we're all people dealing with cancer, really we're the ones at the front end of compassion, because we've been through challenges. And I think really the people that are going to heal this country are the wounded healers. It's a Christian concept, but those of us who've been through it, know what the consequences of not a very healthy society are going to be the ones that are going to help change society. So I think it's wonderful that this message is getting out here.
Can you give us something real top level about cannabis and breast cancer? Is there anything new going on? Any new studies?
I think the big things is really the CBD. I mean, we don't have a lot of good research yet. They're cooking right now, but if you just talk about anecdotal data, and granted the people on the conventional side, there's no data, this is not good data, but I literally had people that I could not control their neuropathy or their insomnia until they tried CBD. So this is after trying Lyrica, Ambien, benzos, you name it. So that's pretty powerful. To me, these are the kind of studies that should be practice changing. If you have refractory condition, people have tried everything that was already conventional, and then they're doing well. Let's say 50% are doing well. That's actionable, especially with CBD, which really has no negative side effects. The only thing I've seen with side effects with CBD is maybe if you take too much, your liver functions might start to go up, but that's something super easy to follow with your primary care. So certainly CBDs, I think the data is best for neuropathy, anxiety, and insomnia. And guess what? That's what a lot of people with breast cancer are going through. So certainly I've been accepting of my patients doing CBD. And one of the things I recommend doing is definitely the quality of the CBD is a concern. Most of it's over the counter, but in Illinois, you do have the advantage of having these dispensaries with actual tested verification of quality and purity. So they are more expensive, but there is that comfort of having that available. And even more beautiful is because we have legalization here, if you need the THC component, you can get a medical card, and that could also help more with the chronic pain issues if you need something more.
Okay.
Or for appetite stimulation.
Well, this was just very awesome. I do thank you, and it's great seeing you from afar.
Same here. And thank you everyone for watching.
Okay.
And just want to share 2 quick sound bites if I could. If you're interested, we're going to focus on health equity at our next SIO conference. It's entirely virtual, so sign up and check out the Integrative Onc website. It's got a lot of great information, including blogs that I write about cannabis and vitamin D and all these other topics. And lastly,
follow Dr. An on social media.
And lastly, I just want to shout out to Brazilian Voices. I'm a board member on Brazilian Voices. They sing to patients in the hospital, so they're now doing it more virtually. But they love to sing. They're a nonprofit organization, and if you would love to check them out, check their music. They have awesome videos where they're singing in unison on Zoom-like videos and in harmony. But just check out Brazilian Voices. They're a beautiful group, and they'll definitely help you today. What's that?
Music therapy.
Music therapy. I love music therapy.
I just bought a drum.
Yes.
I got to learn how to use it.
And that's what gets me through all of my presentations as I'm working on them. So music therapy is great.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. An. We're going to give you back the rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Someone did ask about your presentation. Maybe we can get it for another event, or people will share or something.
If you want, I can answer them. I'm here.
We'll see about how they're going to post presentations.
Okay.
Someone could ask about being able to have access to it. So.
Yeah, what you could do is you could post the questions to me on email, and I could just post them on Twitter.
Okay.
Twitter accounts to see people get their answers.
Oh, that'd be good with the hashtag Empower Resilience, and we can.
Yeah, I'd be
Be
happy
there.
to do that.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you,
everyone.
Dr. An. See you later.
All right, take care.